What if Russia lost Crimea forever? Imagine a nation shaken to its core, its economy crippled, and global power dynamics shifting overnight. Today, we explore how losing Crimea could change Russia forever, and why the world can't look away. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Russia has long seen Crimea as a crown jewel, a symbol of national pride, and a strategic military stronghold. Losing Crimea would not just be a territorial setback, it would shake the very foundation of Russian identity. Today, we'll explore what could happen if this vital region slipped out of Russia's control and the domino effects it could trigger. Historically, Crimea has been a point of tension, with its ports and military bases giving Russia crucial access to the Black Sea. Losing this access would severely weaken Russia's naval dominance and threaten its ability to project power across the region. Economically, Crimea contributes through tourism, agriculture, and energy resources. A loss would mean billions of dollars lost, while the cost to maintain influence over neighboring regions would soar. Politically, the Kremlin could face intense pressure from citizens and military officials, challenging Putin's authority. Internationally, Russia's relationships with Europe, the US, and neighboring states would shift dramatically. Allies might hesitate to engage, while adversaries could exploit the situation. Social unrest within Russia could escalate as propaganda fails to mask the loss. In the coming sections, we will break down the military, economic, political, and cultural consequences of losing Crimea, and why this scenario could change Russia forever. Losing Crimea would redefine Russia's military strategy. The peninsula hosts key naval bases, including Sevastopol, which are vital for controlling the Black Sea. Without Crimea, Russia's ability to deploy its fleet rapidly would be significantly hindered. NATO and neighboring countries could increase their presence, seeing an opportunity to challenge Russian dominance in the region. Ground forces would need repositioning, and Russia would face vulnerabilities along its southern borders. The loss might force Russia to heavily invest in new military infrastructure elsewhere, costing billions. Moreover, morale among troops could suffer, as Crimea is symbolically tied to national pride. The psychological impact of losing such a strategic location cannot be underestimated. Military experts warn that any weakened position in Crimea could embolden opposition groups or separatist movements within Russia itself. Additionally, Russia's influence over nearby countries that rely on its military presence could decline. This could reshape alliances and trigger regional instability. Domestically, public perception would shift dramatically. Citizens may question leadership decisions, leading to protests or political tension. Historically, Russian military strength has been tied to its control over strategic territories. Losing Crimea would challenge decades of military planning and force a complete reassessment of Russia's defense priorities. In short, the military consequences alone could redefine Russia's role as a global power, creating ripple effects that last for years. Economically, losing Crimea would be catastrophic. Crimea contributes to Russia's economy through tourism, agriculture, and energy exploration. The peninsula's resorts attract millions of visitors annually, generating revenue, while fertile land supports agricultural production. Energy exploration, including offshore oil and gas projects, adds another layer of economic importance. Losing these resources would force Russia to seek alternatives, driving up costs and straining the national budget. Trade routes through Crimea, particularly for maritime transport, would be disrupted, affecting imports and exports. Sanctions or international disputes following the loss could further isolate Russia financially. The ruble could weaken, inflation might rise, and foreign investment could decline sharply. Local businesses and jobs in Crimea would be lost, creating social unrest and migration pressures. Moreover, the cost of maintaining military and political influence in other areas to compensate for Crimea's loss could further burden the economy. Experts warn that such a setback could reduce Russia's ability to fund domestic programs, including healthcare, education, and infrastructure development. In a broader sense, economic decline could erode public trust in leadership, leading to political instability. Neighboring countries could also benefit economically from Russia's weakened position, redirecting trade and investment away from Moscow. The economic consequences are intertwined with military and political shifts, amplifying the overall impact. Losing Crimea is not just a territorial issue. It could reshape Russia's entire economic landscape and influence global markets. Politically, losing Crimea would challenge Putin's authority. Crimea has been used as a symbol of national strength, and its loss could undermine public support for the Kremlin. Opposition groups might gain momentum, capitalizing on the government's perceived failure. Regional leaders could question Moscow's decisions, leading to internal political friction. Internationally, Russia's influence over allied nations could weaken, while adversaries might take a more aggressive stance in global affairs. Diplomatic relations would be strained, as Russia would need to negotiate the loss, potentially involving compromises that are unpopular domestically. Political analysts suggest that losing Crimea could trigger constitutional debates, shifts in parliamentary power, or even leadership changes. Public protests could rise, fueled by frustration over military and economic failures. Social media and alternative news sources would amplify dissent, making control over the narrative difficult for state media. The Kremlin might respond with heightened nationalism, increased surveillance, and propaganda campaigns to maintain cohesion. However, over-reliance on these tactics could backfire, deepening societal divisions. International bodies like the UN or regional alliances could pressure Russia, further complicating governance. Political consequences would therefore intertwine with military and economic challenges, amplifying instability. Leadership decisions in the aftermath would determine whether Russia can recover strategically or spiral into prolonged uncertainty. In essence, the political fallout could redefine the balance of power within the country, affecting both domestic governance and international influence for years to come. Culturally, Crimea holds immense significance for Russia. It is home to historic sites, monuments, and regions tied to Russian heritage. Losing the peninsula could create a sense of cultural loss among citizens, intensifying national grief and identity crisis. The Kremlin has long framed Crimea as inseparable from Russian history, reinforcing patriotism. Losing it could weaken this narrative, affecting national unity. Education and media have emphasized Crimea as a symbol of pride, so its loss could shift generational perceptions. Cultural institutions in Crimea would face uncertainty, impacting arts, museums, and heritage preservation. Local populations might experience identity struggles, especially Russian-speaking communities. Cultural diplomacy, used to promote Russia abroad, would also suffer. International exposure to Russian culture through Crimea-based initiatives could decline, diminishing soft power. Migration patterns might change, as residents relocate to remain under Russian governance, influencing demographics elsewhere. The loss could also inspire literature, music, and media portraying the crisis, shaping national sentiment for decades. Propaganda would attempt to reinterpret history, but emotional attachment to Crimea may resist manipulation. Overall, the cultural impact intertwines with political, social, and economic factors, creating a multidimensional challenge for Russia. Understanding the cultural consequences helps explain why Crimea's loss would resonate far beyond territorial maps, affecting identity, pride, and the narrative of Russian greatness. Citizens may struggle to reconcile reality with decades of state-led messaging, creating long-term societal tension. Internationally, losing Crimea would shift global power dynamics. Neighboring countries would reevaluate alliances and security strategies. NATO could strengthen its presence in Eastern Europe, seeing a strategic opportunity. Russia's influence in the Black Sea region would diminish, impacting shipping lanes and trade routes. Global investors might reconsider engagements with Russia, perceiving instability. International bodies, including the UN/EU, and regional councils, could pressure Russia through sanctions, treaties, or mediation. Diplomacy would become more complex as Russia balances defending national pride with managing consequences of the loss. Global perception of Russian strength would weaken, encouraging adversaries to assert influence in contested regions. This could lead to renewed conflicts or power struggles, especially in border states with mixed populations. Trade agreements and energy deals could shift away from Russia, strengthening other nations economically. International media coverage would amplify scrutiny, impacting Russia's soft power worldwide. Strategic partnerships might falter, as allies question Moscow's reliability. Additionally, Russia's approach to global crisis could be compromised, limiting influence in international forums. Loss of Crimea could serve as a warning to other countries about the fragility of territorial gains, affecting diplomatic norms globally. In essence, Crimea's loss is not just a national issue. It has far-reaching consequences that ripple through international relations, economics, and security landscapes, forcing Russia to navigate a transformed global stage. Socially, losing Crimea could lead to unrest within Russia. Citizens may protest against perceived governmental failure, while nationalist groups might intensify rhetoric. The media would play a crucial role in shaping public perception, potentially fueling anger or fear. Internal divisions between urban and rural populations could deepen, with varying interpretations of responsibility. Families with ties to Crimea might experience stress, grief, and relocation challenges. Social cohesion could weaken as communities debate leadership decisions and national strategy. Civil society organizations may gain prominence, advocating for transparency, aid, or policy change. Migration pressures could arise, both from Crimea residents leaving and Russians seeking opportunities elsewhere. Online platforms would amplify debates, misinformation, and political discourse, challenging government control over narratives. Social unrest could coincide with economic struggles, intensifying dissatisfaction among citizens. Security forces might be deployed to maintain order, creating tension between authorities and the public. Education campaigns may attempt to reframe loss as a temporary setback, but emotional attachment to Crimea could limit their effectiveness. Over time, social adaptation could occur, but the immediate aftermath would be marked by anxiety, mobilization, and potential protests. Social consequences, intertwined with economic, political, and cultural factors, illustrate the broad human impact of losing Crimea, emphasizing why this scenario would reverberate throughout Russian society for years. Technologically, Crimea's loss could impact Russia's military and civil infrastructure. Communication networks, defense systems, and research facilities located in Crimea would either be lost or require relocation. Satellite and radar coverage of the Black Sea might be compromised, limiting early warning capabilities. Russia may need to invest heavily in rebuilding infrastructure, diverting funds from other domestic priorities. Civil technology initiatives, including education, internet access, and transport networks in Crimea, would face disruption. Strategic technological projects tied to defense, energy, and security could be delayed, weakening operational efficiency. Dependence on alternative systems would increase costs and create vulnerabilities. Innovation hubs may relocate, impacting research and development. Industrial production in Crimea could halt, disrupting supply chains across Russia. Technological isolation may exacerbate economic consequences, as access to international collaboration could be limited due to political tensions. Digital surveillance and monitoring systems may need upgrades to maintain security elsewhere. Overall, losing Crimea represents a technological setback as much as a territorial one, with ramifications for defense, economy, and civil life. Russia would face years of investment and adaptation to regain technological equilibrium, and the lessons learned could redefine national priorities in innovation, security, and infrastructure development. Psychologically, the loss of Crimea would deeply affect Russian citizens and leadership. National pride, long tied to territorial integrity, would suffer a major blow. Confidence in government decisions may waver, fostering skepticism or dissent. Military personnel and veterans may feel demoralized, questioning the efficacy of their service. Propaganda narratives emphasizing strength and victory could clash with reality, causing cognitive dissonance among the population. Social media and news outlets would magnify frustration, grief, and anger. Generational differences in perception may emerge as younger citizens react differently to historical messaging than older generations. Leadership may attempt to redirect national sentiment toward nationalism, but emotional scars may persist. Public trust in institutions, from military to education, could decline. Citizens may experience anxiety, uncertainty, and fear for future conflicts. Psychological effects could influence voting behavior, migration patterns, and social cohesion. Mental health services may face increased demand, especially in regions directly affected by the loss. Ultimately, the psychological impact complements economic, political, and cultural consequences, shaping how Russia recovers or struggles after losing Crimea. Coping mechanisms would be tested, and collective memory of the loss could influence national identity for decades. In conclusion, losing Crimea could change Russia forever. Militarily, economically, politically, culturally, socially, technologically, and psychologically, the consequences would be profound. Strategic vulnerabilities, economic losses, political unrest, cultural identity crisis, social tensions, technological disruptions, and psychological trauma would ripple across the nation. Internationally, Russia's influence would weaken, while adversaries might gain advantages. Domestically, leadership would face unprecedented challenges, needing to restore public trust and rebuild confidence in state institutions. The cost of regaining stability could span decades, influencing policy, military strategy, and citizen behavior for generations. Losing Crimea is not merely about territory, it is about the intricate balance of power, pride, and identity that shapes Russia. Citizens, leaders, and the global community would witness a transformation that could redefine the nation's trajectory. The lessons learned would affect future governance, foreign policy, and societal priorities. Understanding these consequences helps frame why Crimea remains central to Russian strategy and why its loss is viewed as potentially catastrophic. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into global events and their hidden impacts. Stay informed and see how history unfolds before our eyes.